Welcome back to Reshaped by Loss. My name is Crystal, and I'm so grateful you're here. Today is a little different because we're coming to the end of our first theme for season 2. Over the last 4 episodes, we've been talking about one word: abide. Abide means to remain, to stay, to dwell, to be present with God and present with ourselves, even when life feels difficult. And before we move into our next topic, I wanted to spend some time reflecting on where we've been and what we've learned together. Because abiding isn't something we check off a list. It's a practice. It's a posture. And if you're anything like me, it's something you have to keep choosing over and over again. When we started this conversation, we talked about how grief often makes us want to run. Run from the pain. Run from the questions. Run from the memories. Run from the silence. Because if we're honest, silence can be uncomfortable. Silence has a way of bringing things to the surface. Things we've been avoiding, things we've buried, things we've convinced ourselves we've already dealt with. But abiding asks us to stay. Not because pain is good, not because grief is easy, but because healing rarely happens in the places we refuse to visit. Then we talked about what grief reveals, how loss has a way of exposing what has been underneath the surface all along, like our fears, our expectations, our need for control, and our need to understand. And sometimes even our misunderstanding about God, because grief has a way of stripping away what isn't solid. And while that can feel unsettling, it can also be a place where God begins rebuilding something stronger. We talked about trusting God's timing. And I don't know about you, but that can be one of the hardest lessons, because we want healing right now. We want answers right now. And we want understanding right now. But God often works differently than we do. He is not rushed. He is not panicked. And He is not surprised by our circumstances. And while we focus on arriving, God is often focusing on becoming. Becoming more dependent on Him. Becoming more aware of His presence. Becoming more aligned with His will. And that brings me to something I've been thinking about lately. And that's a simple phrase that keeps coming back to me. And that phrase is, when there is no alignment, there is chaos. Think about that for a moment. When there is no alignment, there is chaos. When our hearts are hurting, but we're pretending they're not, there's chaos. When we're grieving, but refusing to acknowledge, there is chaos. When we're exhausted, but keep pushing ourselves beyond our limits, there's chaos. When God is asking us to trust Him, but we're fighting for control, yep, there's chaos. Not because God has abandoned us, but because something inside of us is out of alignment. I think many of us spend so much energy trying to manage our grief that we never stop long enough to listen to it. Not to let grief lead us, and not to let grief define us, but to understand what it might be revealing. Because sometimes grief is showing us where healing is needed. Sometimes it's revealing wounds that we never addressed. Sometimes it's uncovering fears we never admitted. And sometimes it's simply showing us how deeply we loved. The truth is, abiding creates alignment. Abiding aligns us with reality. Abiding aligns us with truth. Abiding aligns us with God's presence. Because you cannot abide and pretend at the same time. You cannot abide and constantly run. You cannot abide and refuse honestly. Abiding requires us to bring our real selves before God. The hurting parts, the confused parts, the angry parts, the weary parts, all of it. And here's what I've learned. God isn't asking us to have it all figured out. He's asking us to remain. Jesus said in John 15:4, abide in me and I in you. He didn't say understand everything. He didn't say heal immediately. He didn't say stop grieving. He said abide. Stay connected. Stay close. And remain. So as we've walked through these episodes together, I hope you've heard one thing clearly, that you do not have to rush your healing. You do not have to force your growth. You do not have to pretend you're okay when you're not. God is not intimidated by your questions. He is not offended by your tears. And He is not distant from your pain. He is present in it. And I believe that's why abiding matters. Because before we can move forward, we have to become honest with where we are. Before we can accept what is real, we have to stop running from it. Before we can heal, we have to acknowledge what hurts. And that leads us into our next conversation. Because once we learn to abide, once we stop running, once we begin to align ourselves with truth, the next invitation is acceptance. Not approval, not agreement, not pretending we like what happened, but the courage to acknowledge what is real. Because healing cannot begin where truth is denied. And sometimes faith looks less like changing our circumstances and more like accepting where we are and trusting God to meet us there. So as we close this chapter on abiding, I want to share with you and leave you with the reminder that has become the heartbeat of this season. As God grows in us, we will be changed. And trust me, it won't happen overnight. It won't happen all at once, but it will little by little, day by day, especially when we remain, And as we trust and as we abide. Thank you for listening to Reshaped by Loss. If this podcast is speaking to you, please take a moment to follow or subscribe so others walking through grief, loss, and healing can find these conversations too. And as always, take what spoke to you and leave the rest. Be gentle with yourself. And remember, as God grows in us, we will be changed. Shalom, shalom.